CGTN, China Global Television Network. Live from London, this is Global Business.
Hello, welcome to the programme. I'm Jamie Owen.
And I'm Robin Dwyer. Our top stories. The EU says compulsory COVID vaccinations must be considered as more cases of the Omicron variant are found in Europe.
Our other headlines: Russia stages military drills near the border with Ukraine as both countries accuse the other of preparing for war.
The trial of socialite Ghislaine Maxwell hears that paedophile Jeffrey Epstein's pilot flew VIPs, including Prince Andrew, Bill Clinton and Donald Trump.
And the EU launches a $340 billion global plan to invest in infrastructure as an alternative to China's Belt and Road Initiative. The European Union must consider the possibility of mandatory vaccinations in response to rising cases of COVID and the spread of the new Omicron variant. European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen says low vaccine take-up in parts of the EU meant the option had to be on the table.
Austria has already said it will fine people who don't get vaccinated from February, a move that the next German Chancellor says he favours. Let's talk now to our correspondent Trent Murray in Berlin. So making vaccinations compulsory would, of course, be highly controversial. This is a big statement from Ursula von der Leyen, isn't it?
Yeah, it is, Robin, and I think it really underscores the level of concern across the continent at the way hospitals continue to be filled up with seriously sick COVID-19 patients. For a really long time, Europe has focused on trying to convince people to get their shot rather than compel them, but it seems that thinking may be starting to change as they look at all options to try and help those health systems which are facing a serious strain. Ursula von der Leyen saying that all options do need to remain on the table. She noted that around 1/3 of the EU's population still remain unvaccinated. Of course, many of those are children that aren't eligible yet to get their jab, but many are also adults who are still resisting calls to get their vaccine. So that is what needs to be a different approach, possibly with mandatory vaccinations being one option. Let's just have a listen to what she told reporters.
It is understandable and appropriate to lead this discussion now, how we can encourage and potentially think about mandatory vaccination within the European Union. This needs discussion. This needs a common approach, but it is a discussion that I think has to be led.
And this call from von der Leyen comes just within hours, really, of incoming Chancellor Olaf Scholz making a similar statement in German media that he too is open here to bringing in mandatory vaccinations. I think clearly there is some sort of alignment between Brussels and Berlin with this new approach, but it of course does remain to be seen whether other EU countries will be open to taking what will inevitably be such a controversial decision.
Well, let's focus on Germany for a moment. Things only seem to be getting worse where you are. What's the picture like?
Yeah, well, this resurgence of COVID-19 really shows very little sign of slowing down. I mean, just today we saw over 67,000 new cases confirmed. That's amongst the highest we've seen in a one-day period throughout the entire pandemic. But I think more concerningly, we saw close to 500 deaths recorded. Now, that will really concentrate minds, I think, here in Germany, because for a really long time we've heard the health system is struggling to accept seriously sick patients. It is clear now that the death figures are starting to reflect that. So we do expect within the next 24 hours for there to be some sort of announcement regarding new restrictions. Some thoughts that there may even be a hospitality lockdown introduced in Berlin for bars and restaurants being forced to close. We will just have to wait and see, but it certainly is quite the in-tray for Olaf Scholz, who is expected to be sworn in next week. First order of business will be getting a handle on that out-of-control resurgence of COVID-19.
Trent Murray in Berlin, thank you very much.
Well, many countries are putting entry restrictions on their borders, hoping to stop the spread of this new variant. But Dr. Karen Greppin, the Associate Professor from the School of Public Health at Hong Kong University, says travel bans will not work.
I think if countries are trying to prevent it from ever entering and taking root, I think it may be too late. I think we've seen evidence now that these cases have been transmitting in many places for probably a couple of weeks now. And we're not even sure the cases are originating from South Africa at this point. So in the sense that those types of measures are probably ones that are specifically targeting, for example, Southern Africa, I don't think they're worth doing at all. It seems to be the case that countries that have imposed, usually the most important part is the 10 to 14 day quarantine measures. So all the really successful places have had a quarantine of about that length in place for most travelers. That they're universal, meaning it's not for people coming just from one country or another. It's usually all people, including their own citizens, and some form of testing as well to go along with it.
There is no need to cancel Christmas parties. That was the message from Britain's Health Minister Sajid Javid as he urged people to get a COVID booster jab amid concern about this new variant. But his advice goes against that of some of the UK's top doctors who have asked people not to socialise in big groups over Christmas. Well, let's talk now to our correspondent, Naweed Jabarkil. Naweed, booster jabs, more press conferences from Downing Street. This really is a lot like last year, isn't it?
Yeah, that's right, Jamie. Some news just coming in the last half an hour. Another 9 cases of the new Omicron variant identified here in England, taking the country's total up to 22. A further 1 case in Scotland as well, taking that country's total up to 10, which means the UK now has an identified total of 32 cases of Omicron. Still a relatively low number, but facing lawmakers earlier, the Prime Minister Boris Johnson facing a lot of issues about Christmas. Reports in the Mirror newspaper here in the UK today suggesting that last Christmas there was an unofficial party held in Downing Street on the 18th of December, a time when most of London was in Tier 3, the highest level of restriction. So essentially it would have been an illegal party. Downing Street has come out and said that that is simply not true, but the Mirror standing by its story, so a simple denial may not make this go away. Sajid Javid, the Health Secretary, has also been speaking about Christmas because many people here in the country are worried. Will they be able to spend Christmas with their loved ones? A lot of them weren't last year. Will they be able to spend Christmas with their friends and colleagues at Christmas parties, a bit of an institution here in the West? Here's what he had to say about that. Quote, "I think people should continue to behave in the way they were planning to behave over Christmas." He went on to add, "I don't think there's any need to change those plans at the moment." At the moment, very, very important because this situation does remain fluid, as we've been hearing from elsewhere on the continent. At the moment, the cases here, 32 today. Yesterday, the figure was 22. The day before that, 11. So you can see they are increasing day by day. But for the UK government, the main defence that they have is vaccinations, and that's something that they're ramping up.
It's a sense of déjà vu in the UK, another rush to get as many people vaccinated as possible against COVID-19. The country wants tens of millions of adults to get a booster jab before the end of January, even though their effectiveness against the new variant remains unclear.
With this variant, we're trying to learn and assess more about it, and in the meantime, in the next few weeks, we want to build our defences, and our best form of defence still remains our vaccines. It's possible, of course it's possible, but it might be less effective. We just don't know for sure yet, but it's also very likely that they'll remain effective against serious disease.
New restrictions on face coverings have been brought back in England, while all arrivals to the UK now have to self-isolate and get PCR tests. Lawmakers have overwhelmingly approved the plans. Some in the ruling party, though, think the rules are an overreaction, while others, mostly on the opposition benches, want even tougher measures. Caught in the middle, a Prime Minister eager not to disrupt a second Christmas in a row.
100% of the passengers arriving from every other country in the world must take a PCR test, and they cannot get out of quarantine, Mr. Speaker, unless they test negative. Those are balanced and proportionate measures designed to protect the British people from the Omicron variant, and that's the right approach to take.
As the UK ramps up its vaccine rollout, there are concerns about the logistical pressures it will cause on the National Health Service. Many doctors and nurses are already stretched thin, not only dealing with the pandemic that's still registering almost 40,000 cases a day here, but the backlog it's caused for other illnesses. Away from the front line, the shop fronts. Many businesses also keeping a close eye on Omicron. Masks are now mandatory in shops, but any further restrictions will be felt across the economy. Cases of the new variant here do remain relatively low, but with officials admitting they simply don't know what's around the corner, the UK is in yet another coronavirus limbo.
And that limbo not just affecting people here in the UK, but officials as well, as we heard from Sajid Javid there and the Prime Minister reiterating at Prime Minister's questions that they're still trying to figure out what this variant will mean for not just vaccines, but also in terms of stopping the spread of coronavirus and what measures they might have to use to bring those in and the resistance they'll face for that. In terms of the resistance, the one bit of silver lining for the government, at least politically, giving them some wiggle room, is, as we've been hearing, this isn't just something that the UK is trying to figure out, but the rest of Europe and the rest of the world as well.
Louis Jabarkle in London, thank you very much.
The world's top vaccine makers say jabs now in use may be less effective against the new Omicron COVID variant, which has been appearing in countries across the world since it was identified a week ago. So, will new vaccines be needed? Rasmus Beck-Hansen is co-founder and CEO of health analytics company Airfinity.
That is really the $100 billion question, right? So we saw Moderna's CEO yesterday coming out saying it's very likely we need a new vaccine. Pfizer, on the other hand, has said they don't think it's that likely. Many scientists think it is very likely because it's a very different virus, Omicron, from the Delta. So I think we don't really know. But if it is the case, it will take, so we modeled this, it will take at least half a year before we get anywhere near enough vaccines to vaccinate big parts of the world. So that would have tremendous ramifications for global protection if Omicron overtakes Delta and if we need new vaccines.
So how difficult will that be? What will the main challenges be in getting that up and running as soon as possible?
Yeah, well, so we saw what happened this year, right? So I think it's quite remarkable that we look to have produced, the world has produced around 11 billion vaccines we project at the end of the year. But shifting that production capacity over to a new vaccine takes time. It takes around 100 days from detecting the new variant to kind of starting to have the production. And that's only for the mRNA vaccines, which are the ones that are faster to reconfigure. But then you need to actually start having the production ramp up. And also, although there is a lot of vaccine production capacity out there, and we're now producing kind of a billion a month, it's not something that can happen very quickly. For the other vaccines, the non-mRNA vaccines, the biological vaccines, it will take even longer. We saw kind of in the beginning of the pandemic how long it took for them. For instance, the AstraZeneca, we also saw the Russian Sputnik vaccine and others, Novavax, that has really struggled with ramping up. So some of that is expected to be seen again.
And we've obviously found out a lot over the past 2 years about making vaccines quickly. What lessons have we learned?
Well, I think, first of all, we've learned that we can do it much faster than we thought we could. When I say 100 days, that might sound like a long time if we're all kind of waiting for a new vaccine, but that is just actually remarkably fast compared to how it used to be. It used to be taking 5, sometimes even 10 years to develop a new vaccine. So the whole thing has been massively accelerated. We also know we can create vaccines that are more targeted, more specifically targeted at a given virus. We know we have higher efficacy. So we saw the kind of 90–95% efficacy of Moderna and Pfizer, which is also, again, quite remarkable. If you look at flu vaccines, for instance, they're only around 50%, or even lower. So I think we've learned the vaccine market is in a very different place. But still, with that, it still will take time to have enough vaccines to the whole world if that's needed.
Well, I wanted to pick up on that point because once the vaccine is in play, there's likely to be a race for countries to get their hands on it. How harmful could that be in the move towards getting everyone vaccinated?
Yeah, I think it's very likely we see the same global inefficiencies we saw so far, in the spring, where we see that some countries are trying to get as many as they can fast. They do exclusive contracts. They over procure. So a lot of these dynamics are likely to happen again. We're going to see COVAX coming kind of end of the line, and the global vaccine inequities that we are currently witnessing with big parts of the world not being vaccinated is very likely to be replicated again, sadly.
Turkey's central bank has intervened to prop up the value of the lira after the currency fell to another record low. The bank has confirmed it sold foreign currency to stabilize what it calls unhealthy price formations in the foreign exchange rate. The lira fell to 13.8 against the dollar after President Erdogan vowed to continue cutting borrowing costs ahead of the next election in 2023.
Small British energy supplier Zog Energy has ceased trading, becoming the 25th casualty of soaring energy costs. UK regulator Ofgem says it will appoint a new supplier for the company's 11,000 customers. Wholesale gas prices are more than 300% higher than the beginning of the year, but the government's price cap limits how much of the increases can be passed on to customers.
UK manufacturing is facing its highest costs in 30 years amid supply chain disruption. The research by IHS Markit indicated the strain on supply chains led to further substantial lengthening of lead times, resulting in shortages of components and commodities.
Tel Aviv has been named as the most expensive city in the world to live in. The Economist Intelligence Unit survey put the Israeli city top for the first time, pushing Paris and Singapore down to joint second. Tel Aviv's rise from fifth place last year comes on the back of soaring inflation and supply chain problems, which have pushed up prices globally.
The European Union has unveiled its new Global Gateway programme in what's being widely seen as an alternative to China's Belt and Road Initiative. The $340 billion plan will use public and private money to fund infrastructure projects for developing countries. Well, let's talk now to our correspondent Ryan Thompson in Brussels. Ryan, is the EU directly referring to China's Belt and Road Initiative in their new programme?
Hi there, Jamie. Well, not specifically, but the Commission isn't pretending that the Belt and Road Initiative doesn't exist. Of course, even as you look across Europe, you see examples of Belt and Road type projects, notably a rail link Cornwall in June, to try and find a way to really spend to support lower and middle income type countries with an infrastructure program that is a higher quality alternative to Belt and Road. Because critics, including some G7 countries, say that the Belt and Road Initiative is straddled with problems, notably that the Chinese government, they accuse it of using it as a diplomacy tool and also establishing and laying out some unfair financing practices. A September survey found that a number of countries were strapped with $340 billion of hidden debt. When the Commission President was speaking earlier today, she compared the two programs and really tried to outline what the European version of this would do differently here.
We have been around a lot already, and they have the experience with us too. They know we are transparent. They know it is accompanied by good governance. They know there will be no unsustainable debt levels as a leftover. They know it is with the country itself inclusively that we design the projects.
So ultimately here, Jamie, there were a lot of questions from reporters and journalists asking to compare the two programs, but the Commission tried to prioritize that it's not about that, it's what we are trying to do to improve the global community, notably to improve supply chain, improve healthcare, improve a lot of the issues that have also come from the COVID-19 crisis. We expect the first next steps to really come out of this when EU leaders meet with their African Union counterparts at a summit in the first part of 2022. That's where we expect a lot of these initial programs to happen.
Ryan Thompson in Brussels, thank you very much.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead, the pilot who flew the VIPs. Witness testimony begins in the sex trafficking trial of Ghislaine Maxwell.
Search CGTN Europe wherever you get your podcasts to subscribe to The Agenda podcast. The Agenda with me, Stephen Cole, always gets to the heart of the story. Just subscribe today and listen now.
Events have consequences. Words create impact.
One more offensive in a long line of battles that's been ongoing for more.
Just got to be careful here with some gunshots. Excuse us, excuse us.
The world today matters for your world tomorrow.
The number of casualties is growing quickly.
Why, this is one of the hardest hit towns in the region.
The world today, every day on CGTN.
Facing the unknown is always difficult. In a world in turmoil, it's easy to lose orientation. But when the storms come, we have to see the possibilities. Reinvent. Find new opportunities. Discover a path forward. CGTN. See the difference.
The world has changed under the pressure of the pandemic. For many of us, life is returning to some kind of normal. As we're adapting to changes in all of our lives, let Global Business Europe be your guide to the new normal. Join us weekdays on CGTN.
Welcome back to Global Business Europe. Just a reminder that CGTN is available to watch for free on all the major digital platforms, on Smart TV or online on Roku, Apple TV, Amazon Fire and Android TV, YouTube and Dailymotion, CGTN.com and the CGTN app, and in the UK on Freeview.
Now it's that time of year, the end of term report on the global economy, and unsurprisingly, the Organisation for Economic Cooperation and Development says the global recovery is uneven.
The good news is that output in most OECD countries is back on its pre-pandemic path, but lower-income economies, particularly those where vaccination rates are low, are at risk of being left behind. Our correspondent Juliet Mann has the details. Juliet.
Thanks, Robin. Thanks, Jamie. Yes, the world is looking better, but economic recovery is losing some momentum. The OECD says monetary policymakers should be cautious and recommends governments focus on vaccinations. Chief economist Laurence Boone outlined the cost of vaccinating the world.
G20 countries have spent $10 trillion supporting people and their economies since the beginning of the pandemic. It would only take $50 billion to ensure vaccination worldwide. I'm just saying.
The main risks remain the global health situation and economic imbalances. And the new variant is an additional uncertainty that could hold back economic recovery.
The COVID crisis has increased debt levels, and as I've mentioned before, this was appropriate in the crisis. So the COVID debt is not the concern in itself, but rather the rising trend in debt over decades. And as the recovery progresses, the issue now is what are governments doing with this money?
Well, let me run through some of the numbers for you. The outlook projects global GDP growth at 5.6% for 2021. And that's for this year, sure. And in 2022, we're looking at 4.5% before it's going to settle back to what's a more usual 3.2%. In 2023, and that's when the boost from reopening economies are going to normalise. And I should say that this is the first time the OECD has produced estimates for 2023. Now let's look at the imbalances that are slowing growth, raising costs and persisting longer than expected. Energy, oil and gas prices, they've surged, and the OECD expects price volatility over the winter because inventories are low. Tensions in production chains could become more entrenched, bottlenecks in manufacturing chains, labour shortages, a scarcity of some key materials. All of that could further prolong already elevated inflation, which then affects household incomes and consumption. The OECD has significantly increased its inflation forecast from 3 months ago. And there's concern, too, about the slowdown in China. A further decline could dampen global growth up to 1%. In 2022 and 2023. Well, Lorenzo Codogno is founder and chief economist at Lorenzo Codogno Macro Advisors. Good to see you again, Lorenzo. So I suppose we could say this is cautious optimism. The recovery is real, but there are considerable policy challenges, aren't there, for monetary officials?
That's correct. I think the outlook is still broadly unchanged, although we don't know exactly whether they have fully taken into account the recent new variant of the virus. However, the OECD highlights the risks and the imbalances. And certainly these imbalances are much more pronounced in the emerging market world, which can actually suffer significantly, and in some countries also the sustainability of public debt might be challenged.
You mentioned there that these forecasts were largely made pre-Omicron, rocking the markets and confidence, but it's still top of the OECD's significant risks. So there's a lot of uncertainty, isn't there, about new variants and their potency and what the long-term implications could be.
Absolutely. And I think the OECD has most other international organizations and central banks have underestimated the surge in inflation and also the duration of the inflation surge. So this time they take a very cautious approach. They continue to believe that this is temporary, transitory, which I fully subscribe. But they also say that central banks will need to carefully monitor the situation. And if in the spring of next year the situation has not improved, probably they need to take some actions. I think it's a balancing act, but I think it's a good balancing to some extent.
So a balancing act, but the OECD does say that central banks shouldn't panic. What do you think they should do then? I mean, sitting back and waiting to see till spring, is that going to be enough? Well,
they have to commit to a prompt reaction as soon as financial markets and economic agents perceive that the risk is real and kind of feeds into their expectations, into wage behavior and so forth. But so far, I would say the risk is definitely substantial in the US, but not in the rest of the world. So I think central banks should indeed wait longer and see whether the situation will be reabsorbed pretty soon.
Speaking of the rest of the world, let's talk about China, because that was one that the OECD highlighted, the drop in China's economy there being a concern. What impact could that have on the global economy?
Well, China is slowing. I think it's slowing also for structural reasons, not just the cyclical factors. But the OECD also takes the view that if there is a more substantial slowdown in China than currently expected, it could actually have a substantial impact for the rest of the world, which is not surprising. However, I would personally be more concerned about much smaller economies that have not the solidity, the economic solidity of China, but are at risk because of high level of debt. And in South America, there are many economies that are suffering right now. There are many African countries that are under pressure. So I wouldn't be surprised to see some defaults in the future. So I think in that case, the situation is really, really delicate.
And what the OECD said was that debt should be good debt. What's going to be important, Lorenzo, is how that debt, what governments do, how they spend that money. Lorenzo Cudjoglio, thank you very much. Back to you guys.
Welcome.
Thank you. The pilot who flew the VIPs has been giving evidence, and the first witness has taken the stand in Ghislaine Maxwell's trial. The British socialite is charged with sex trafficking and other crimes. Let's talk now to our correspondent, John Terrett, in New York. So, John, we've now heard from what's been described as the first accuser.
Yes, that's right, Robin and Jamie. This is at the Thurgood Marshall Courthouse in the Civic District of New York, which you can see just over my shoulder here. And this is the first accuser of 4. Remember, this case centres around only 4 women who say they were underage when Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell abused them. Many others have come forward, but the case centres on just 4. So we are hearing from what the court refers to as minor victim number one. That is court parlance for her. She's now a woman in her 40s. The court has given her a name, Jane, so she's known in the courthouse as Jane. And she says that between the age of 14 and 16, she was abused on a regular basis by Jeffrey Epstein and her friend Ghislaine Maxwell, who is standing trial. She also says that the relationship with Epstein continued well beyond the age of 18 while she was attending school in New York City. Now, she says she was recruited at a music summer camp in the state of Michigan, in the Midwest of the country, when she was a young girl, and Jeffrey Epstein was a benefactor at that particular summer camp. Ghislaine Maxwell acted like an elder sister, she said initially, but as the relationship and the abuse went on, that changed into something more sinister. She then gave a very graphic account of what happened, which is too graphic for television, quite frankly, but she did testify that Maxwell was present on multiple occasions and often joined in the abuse. Now, the defence says that Jane is a liar, and that it questions why she didn't mention any of this to anybody over 2 decades. And it also brought up the fact that she received $5 million in compensation from the Jeffrey Epstein Compensation Fund. Now, minor victim number one, in response to that, has been saying she was simply too ashamed to mention it to anybody any earlier than she did. She first mentioned it to a boyfriend, and that also her mother was obsessed with keeping in with the rich and famous, and that was another reason for not mentioning it sooner than she did. The victim number one, Jane, is still on the stand and is being questioned at the moment.
Now, John, we've also heard from Jeffrey Epstein's pilot.
Yes, this is a man called Lawrence Paul Vysotsky. Now, he flew Jeffrey Epstein on various private planes over almost 3 decades. And he testified in court yesterday, Tuesday, to seeing many members of what you might call the rich and famous high society on board those planes, including, and he named them, President Bill Clinton on multiple occasions, President Trump. He couldn't say whether President Trump was flying with his family or not. The Hollywood actor Kevin Spacey, Prince Andrew, the Duke of York, a senior member of the United Kingdom royal family, the violinist Itzhak Perlman, and 2 leading United States senators, George Mitchell and John Glenn. There is no suggestion that any of these men did anything wrong, but they were present on these flights. Now, Lawrence Paul Vysotsky says that during those flights, of which there were obviously many, many, he saw no sexual activity on board and was invited, the cockpit door was locked, and was invited back to use the bathroom whenever he wished. There were no restrictions on the flights. He said that he couldn't visualize in his mind's eye seeing minor victim number one, Jane, who's been testifying yesterday and again this morning. And of the relationship between the two of them, he said that Maxwell was very definitely number 2 and Epstein was the big number 1. Now, the court also heard that Jeffrey Epstein paid for the private school fees of Vysotsky's children, something that he did, we are told, the court heard, for all his staff. And he also paid for land for a home to be built where Vysotsky now lives in New Mexico, where Jeffrey Epstein also had a house, and there were lavish gifts of private cars as well. The trial here in Lower Manhattan is slated to last 6 weeks and is likely to continue right through Christmas. Robin and Jamie?
John Terrett in New York, thank you. You're watching CGTN, still ahead. Russian roulette. President Putin wants talks with the West over Ukraine, but blames NATO aggression for tensions in the region.
It's the first day in Germany that vaccination centers like this one are offering a 3rd jab.
There are fears there could be a 5th wave of COVID-19 cases.
Market watchers have a keen eye on infection rates,
safety and efficacy of COVID-19 shots.
France closed schools in the first lockdown in spring last year.
France has been a leader in vaccinating youngsters.
If a spike necessitates another lockdown,
Italy is now close to reaching its target of immunising 80% of the population over the age of 12.
On the agenda with me, Stephen Cole, we look up into space. We look down into data. We look at debt. We look at politics. We look at opioids, climate change. We look at all the issues that really matter around the world. But you matter too. We want to tell the stories you want to see and hear about. Make it your agenda.
The agreement is signed. But what is the real deal now the UK has left the EU? For trade, for business, for the city, for ordinary people. Make sense of Brexit with CGTN.
Ever wondered what's the difference between a bear and a bull market? Where are the cash cows? And who are the lame ducks? And what exactly are black swans? Grey rhinos? And unicorn companies? Make sense of it all with Global Business, only on CGTN.
Welcome back to Global Business Europe with Jamie Owen and Robin Dwyer. Our top stories. The EU says compulsory COVID vaccinations must be considered now as more cases of the Omicron variant are found in Europe.
The trial of socialite Ghislaine Maxwell hears that paedophile Jeffrey Epstein's pilot flew VIPs, including Prince Andrew, Bill Clinton and Donald Trump.
The EU launches a $340 billion global plan to invest in infrastructure as an alternative to China's Belt and Road Initiative.
President Vladimir Putin says he wants talks with Western countries as tensions rise over Russian troops on the Ukrainian border. The Russian leader wants guarantees that NATO will not expand east, adding that Moscow's activity in the region is only in response to external threats. US Secretary of State Antony Blinken is due to meet Russia's foreign minister, with NATO warning of serious consequences for any hostile Russian acts.
Meanwhile, Ukraine's President Zelensky has said direct talks with Moscow may be the only way to end the threat of confrontation.
We must confess that without troops, we will not be able to stop the war. We must tell the truth that we will not be able to stop the war without direct negotiations with Russia. And today, this has already been recognised by all our external partners.
Well, let's talk to our correspondent Stuart Smith in Moscow. Stuart, is Putin likely to get any assurances on his concerns about NATO expansion?
This issue of expansion has existed for decades, and NATO is quite clear on this, that although Russia says after World War II NATO promised not to ally with countries further east than Germany, it has done so, but only at the request of those countries such as Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Slovakia, countries that would like to join the alliance. And as a defensive alliance, the Secretary-General Jens Stoltenberg said again today, Russia has no veto power over who can and cannot join NATO. But we do know Ukraine is one of the countries that does want to join, has done since 2008 at least. And the reason it's not yet part of NATO, according to NATO, is that there are still many issues to be resolved within Ukraine, such as corruption and problems with the rule of law. But that hasn't stopped any sort of political rhetoric from NATO saying how it will aid Ukraine, not in some sort of Article 5 situation where another NATO ally must go to protect another NATO ally, but with political support, and also by offering things such as training and equipment, which the United States has done for Ukraine in the latest round of escalation.
Stuart, this meeting comes as Russia holds military drills near the border with Ukraine. What more can you tell us about what's going on there?
Another military drill on top of troop movements which Russia has not explicitly said are going on, but indeed another 10,000 troops taking part in these winter drills, around 30 sites around the Ukraine border in the east and also Crimea to the south where these operations are ongoing. Ukraine now estimates around 100,000 Russian troops surround Ukraine and to some extent, and that's why Ukraine is so worried. NATO has said it also has reason to believe that this is a force which could potentially invade. It's seeing signs such as disinformation campaigns in Ukraine about the way the Ukrainian government operates. It's seen claims that from Russia that Ukraine could attempt to invade and try and take back the eastern Donbass region by force, and the United States and NATO said today this is all a way for Russia to potentially justify acting first in the face of what Russia would call Ukrainian aggression, but that could just be a setup. We heard President Putin's main concern about exactly what's going on with the NATO situation earlier today.
The threat on our western borders is really growing. We have talked about this repeatedly. Just look how close to Russian borders the military infrastructure of the North Atlantic Alliance came. We take this more than seriously. In this situation, we are taking adequate military and technical measures. I would say once again, it's not us who is threatening anybody. To accuse us of this is really shifting the blame. It's irresponsible, to say the least.
The United States Secretary of State Antony Blinken says there's no certainty about what Russia may get up to, but one thing's clear, he says, for him, the idea that Ukraine represents a threat to Russia would be a bad joke if it weren't so serious. He says NATO is not a threat to Russia, it's a defensive alliance with no intent to harm Russia, and that every step they take is defensive in nature, and its alliance partners have no desire to escalate the situation. He says he would like to see things all sorted out through dialogue. The Minsk agreement, a 13-point plan negotiated between Ukraine, Russia and other Western states about how exactly to end this conflict. He says if Russia does choose to invade, then in his words, high-impact economic measures that they have refrained from using so far will be applied. We don't know exactly what those are, but Antony Blinken said when he sees Russia's Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov on Thursday, he will make it very clear what those sanctions or other economic measures could be.
Stuart Smith, our correspondent in Moscow, thank you very much.
It's now 5 months until the French presidential election, and the race for the Élysée Palace is starting to heat up. The latest candidate to put themselves forward is also one of the most controversial, outspoken former TV personality and newspaper columnist Éric Zemmour. Our correspondent Ross Cullen reports.
Taking aim at the French presidency, the far-right pundit Éric Zemmour is ready to take a shot at winning the election. He's joining the race for the top job, but his candidacy brings with it controversy. Convicted of incitement of racial hatred 10 years ago, he once told a TV chat show that drug dealers were mostly blacks and Arabs. Zemmour, who is Jewish, has previously offended women, Muslims, the LGBTQI community, and has criticised the media, liberals and the elite.
Super nul.
I don't like him at all. As far as the Jewish community is concerned, he should calm down. He has done too much. He shouldn't be part of the presidential campaign. I think he is a mug and does nothing but nasty things.
I think he underlines issues like immigration and security, which are both important for France right now.
Éric Zemmour doesn't really have a well-known party. It's a bit unstructured, and the French fear the extremes a bit. But he gets to the heart of the matter.
For 2 generations, one family has had a hold on France's far-right politics. Jean-Marie Le Pen made it into the second round of the presidential election in 2002. Last time out, his daughter Marine faced Emmanuel Macron in the runoff. She faces a battle on her hands as Éric Zemmour now wants to be the new cheerleader for the hard right.
It's already a packed field as the runners and riders jockey for position to try to unseat President Macron, the current incumbent of the presidential office and residence here in France, the Élysée Palace.
Zemmour is a well-known media commentator, and he was a columnist for centre-right paper Le Figaro, and he's igniting fierce debate about his policies.
I think that what I say is heard by the country, and that there is part of this country that has been waiting for this speech for years, for decades.
Those speeches are regularly peppered with incendiary remarks, in a style reminiscent of another TV personality, the one in the United States who made it all the way to the White House.
There are many links to Donald Trump with what he says, also something of Vladimir Putin with his masculinity. He wants to put manliness and male strength at the heart of the debate.
Large crowds are buying into Eric Zemmour's anti-Islam, anti-immigration, ultra-nationalist discourse, and he is determined to take centre stage. The question is, can he win on the biggest stage in the presidential election next April? Ross Cullen, CGTN, Paris.
Fiji has welcomed its first international tourists in 20 months. Traditional singers and dancers greeted the arrivals to the South Pacific nation. Visitors are only allowed from certain countries and must be fully vaccinated.
Xiomara Castro is to become the first female leader of Honduras after the ruling Conservative Party candidate conceded defeat in the presidential election. Early reports suggest that Castro's left-wing Libre Party also looks set for a majority in Congress. The left was last in power 12 years ago when Castro's husband was ousted in a coup.
3 high school students have been killed and 8 wounded when a fellow pupil shot them in the US state of Michigan. A 15-year-old boy has been arrested after the shooting in the village of Oxford.
Amid growing concern over the Omicron variant, the United States government and the drug maker Moderna are arguing over the patents for its coronavirus vaccine. Caroline Malone reports now from Washington.
There's little doubt in the scientific community that vaccines are helping to reduce illness and deaths in the COVID-19 pandemic. But it's proving harder to agree on who deserves credit for inventing the Moderna vaccine, with the US National Institutes of Health contesting the company's patents in the US.
I think Moderna has made a serious mistake here in not providing the kind of co-inventorship credit to people who played a major role in the development of the vaccine that they are now making a fair amount of money off of.
Moderna is one of 3 vaccines approved for use in the United States. It's a messenger RNA vaccine which teaches our cells how to make a protein to trigger an immune response. The idea has been researched for decades. But as the coronavirus emerged, NIH and Moderna refocused on an mRNA vaccine to protect against COVID-19.
Yeah, I think we better be careful.
According to the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases Director Anthony Fauci, NIH scientists are among those who were able to stabilize the pre-fusion spike protein, which is used in virtually all of the vaccines that are now successful. Moderna says it doesn't agree that those scientists co-invented claims to the mRNA sequence of their COVID-19 vaccine, and it has only recognized the contribution of NIH scientists in just 1 of 4 patents, according to advocacy group Public Citizen. Moderna has plans to build a state-of-the-art mRNA facility in Africa to churn out up to 500 million vaccine doses annually. The CEO of Moderna said in October they were in good ongoing dialogue with the World Health Organization about long-term licensing of COVID-19 vaccines. But the WHO said it was concerned about a lack of progress in talks.
We have been very clear that we will not be litigating during the pandemic. Anybody who uses our IP and our patents are on the internet. Any scientist can go and read them and use the recipe to make the product. The question is, do they want a license for a long term? And as you know, discussing license has a lot of implications.
While disagreements over patents and licensing continue, the world is again focusing on a new coronavirus variant. Well, US President Joe Biden said Monday his administration is talking to vaccine officials from Moderna, Pfizer and J&J to develop contingency plans for Omicron-specific vaccine boosters. That's in addition to previous discussions to boost capacity to ensure coronavirus vaccines are supplied to poorer countries. Caroline Malone, CGTN, Washington.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead, delivering the future. Robots helping sort the mail in Greece.
Each day, there are millions of stories. Each one can open new perspectives, new possibilities. Wherever you look, we are there. To see, discover, explore. We put the pieces together to find what really matters to you, all around the world, all around the clock. Our reporters are at home across the globe. From our headquarters in Beijing and production centers in Washington, Nairobi, and London, China Global Television Network. Stories from across the globe, reaching people across the globe. CGTN. See the difference.
Mari, what would you say is a good question?
Stephen, I'd say it's one where there's always more than one answer.
The Answers Project is a new podcast series from CGTN Europe. With me, Stephen Cole.
And me, Mari Beveridge. In each episode, we'll take a complex question.
And with the help of some of the world's foremost experts, shine light on some of the answers. So join us for The Answers Project.
Available wherever you get your podcasts.
Hello, welcome back to Global Business Europe. In the UK, transport accounts for a third of all emissions. Electric vehicles are seen as one way to try to reduce that and to meet climate targets.
The European Union needs at least 30 million electric vehicles on the road by 2030. But when their batteries run out, what happens then? Emma Keeling reports.
We love our cars, but not the pollution they produce. In the UK, transport accounts for a third of CO2 emissions. Electric vehicles are seen as key to solving that, and by 2030, the European Union needs at least 30 million electric vehicles, or EVs, to reach climate targets. But the efficient recycling of the lithium-ion batteries they run on is still being sorted out, and we need to make sure we're not replacing one sort of pollution with another. I'm here at the University of Birmingham, where researchers, along with their colleagues at Leicester, have discovered a new method of separating and recovering materials. Dr. Dan Reid is the head of the RELIB team at Birmingham University. RELIB stands for the Recycling and Reuse of EV lithium-ion batteries. One of the problems is everybody is making their own type of EV battery, and there's no standardised approach to recycling.
We're trying to recycle all possible lithium-ion batteries that are on the market at the moment. So we want to keep the materials that are in batteries in the economy and within the life stream process. So once we've got the materials and they're being used, we don't want to put them in landfill and get rid of them because they're valuable materials. Some of them are critical materials that it's very difficult to get hold of.
The term lithium battery refers to a family of different lithium metal chemistries. A lithium-ion battery is rechargeable and is used in EVs. Typically, it has an anode made of graphite coated on copper foil. Plastic separates it from the cathode materials that are made of layered crystals of lithium metal oxides, which are usually a mix of nickel, cobalt, aluminium and manganese coated onto aluminium foil. So what are we looking at here?
We have a Nissan Leaf battery pack, model 2012. We have 3 stack-off modules, and inside these battery modules, depending on the type and the model, we have lithium-ion cells. We have 4 cells embedded inside the module.
You can see that it's got a little bit of copper shining through underneath the graphite. So that's the anode there. Separating the anode from the cathode is a separator, which is plastic, and it is designed to melt at high temperatures, and it's porous to electrolyte, and it stops the anode and the cathode from coming in electrical contact. Because if that happens, then you'll get a short circuit, and you'll have a very bad day.
So what we're looking at here as part of the project is to separate the batteries into anodes and cathodes. So this system in the middle is sending ultrasound waves through the assembly, and as you can see, coming out the other end is a pretty clean current collector.
That is amazing. Look at that.
And so this is what happens when the waves interact with the surface. You can see the vibrations that are caused breaking up the surface, and that eruption distributes the material off the current collector and into the solution.
So what's the big plan here? To have your own manufacturing plant which will recycle and then make brand new batteries?
So the university and in the Faraday project, we're going to set up and show this technology is possible. We're going to build a demonstrator site out at Tyseley here in Birmingham, and then we're going to be able to license and demonstrate the technology that as more electric vehicles come to their end of life, that other companies will take up this technology and recycle the batteries fully.
Dr. Daniel Reid from the University of Birmingham talking to CGTN's Emma Keeling. The post in Greece is getting a makeover. A Chinese-made robotic system has been adopted by Greece's national postal provider.
It says the robots not only make parcel distribution more efficient, but also help create a COVID-safe working environment. Our correspondent Evangelos Sipsas reports now from Athens.
It is early in the morning. Vasilis' shift just started at the Hellenic Post Service. His job is to make sure that a number of small yellow robots work smoothly. Their job is to sort out mail and small packages to the right bins.
The robots are a really nice, convenient technology. They look after the distribution that we would otherwise do by hand. And then they let us know once the basket is full of parcels, so we can send it out to bureaus across the country. We place the parcel with the QR code facing up. The robot reads the barcode and the postal code and then sends it to the right bin.
About 2 months ago, Greece's National Post Services provider, or ELTA as it is known in Greek, introduced a fleet of 55 tiny yellow robots to join its employees at the group's facilities in Trioneri, just north of Athens. They have taken over a process which until recently was either semi-mechanized or done manually. The Chinese-made robotic system developed by a company called Zhengyang Libao is the first installation of its kind in Europe. ELTA's management believes this investment will allow better use of the service's human resources.
The work is more efficient, and also it's not tiring as it used to be. I mean, imagine that there are night shifts here, which is very difficult for people to walk around and make mistakes, and people yell at them because they didn't make the job correctly. With this technology, everything is that much more efficient.
The robots receive the parcels at 8 in-feed stations. They identify the destination through a code scan and then deliver them to 144 sorting destinations, which currently handle about 76% of total deliveries at this exact center. Quite impressive, right? But when we hear about robots, we think about less jobs and less opportunities. Well, according to the Postal Service, it's quite the contrary.
All the employees that existed in all our shifts still exist. The job is much easier. It's not tedious. When you see the plants working, you'll see that it's much easier to put a parcel and to sort them. And even if you talk to them, you'd see that the job is much easier and much more flexible.
The deployment of the robots has also helped create a COVID-free environment at the Postal Sorting Center, allowing operations to continue and people to keep their jobs. As many Greek companies emerge from the pandemic, it seems some are likely to turn to robots as they look to streamline operations and embrace digitalization. Evangelos Sipsas for CGTN, Athens.
The headlines again. The EU says compulsory COVID vaccinations must be considered as more cases of the Omicron variant are found in Europe.
Our other headlines, the EU launches a $340 billion global plan to invest in infrastructure as an alternative to China's Belt and Road Initiative.
And Russia stages military drills near the border with Ukraine as both countries accuse the other of preparing for war.
That's it for Global Business Europe. Thank you for watching. More on all of our stories at europe.cgtn.com, and do follow CGTN Europe on Twitter, Facebook and Instagram.
We're on smart TV apps, Roku, Apple TV, Amazon Fire and Android TV, YouTube and Dailymotion, CGTN.com and the CGTN app, and in the UK on Freeview. Coming up next on CGTN, it's Africa Live. We'll see you again tomorrow, same time,